Greetings. This lecture is on the introduction to coaching and coaching skills. We're going to spend the next couple of weeks addressing all of the basic skills that you need to be an effective coach for your employees. We started this course talking about motivation theories and what it takes to motivate your workers and the basic things that motivate your employees. Now we've also talked about communication. We've talked about, this week we're also talking about trust. All these tools together, along with understanding how to hire people, also understanding how to manage the laws, manage issues of diversity, we take it the next step and take all these tools combined and think about what does it take for me to manage these people on a daily basis. We're going to talk about basic ideas of coaching and mentoring, but we're also going to start talking about how to do performance appraisals and give feedback on performance and give feedback on disciplinary issues. These are some of the most essential things that we need to address, because ultimately what's going to happen if we don't manage our employees well, we're going to end up having to deal with firing and deal with legal issues. So all these combined help us to get to a place where we really understand that the better the job we do in coaching and managing our people on a daily basis, the better we are in the long haul. So coaching comes under the larger umbrella of performance management, and specifically in performance management, the idea of training and development. If you go back to the HR systems model that I introduced to you guys in the very first week of class, you understand that in the implementation phase, as we get into the functional areas of HR, training and development is a key part of that. And even though that model doesn't address training and development as a part of performance management, from my perspective it is, because if I don't help you to be a better performer as a manager, I'm dropping the ball. And one of the key ways that I help you to be a better performer is through the concept of training and development. So, with respect to training and development, we know that there are many things that people need, the skills that they need on an immediate basis to be able to do their job. And I think organizations tend towards a much better job dealing with the issues of training. For example, if you need to know how to use a computer program, then make sure that you get the skills to be able to do that computer program. If they're changing, a new way of doing things and changing processes, they engage in training to help you do that. I'm not saying all companies do training well, but at least it's on their radar about that people need to get the basic training. But what we're going to learn is training's never enough. You can put people in a classroom, you can address those things, but it truly never is going to be enough to help people to be successful. So what do we do on a daily basis to help our employees to become better performers? Well, we coach them, and we'll spend quite a bit of time in this lecture talking about the coaching thing. We also appraise them, and that's part of what we'll be addressing in the next week, which is how do we appraise them, how do we give them performance feedback, how do we address the concerns that they have as employees to bridge the gap between the performance where they're at and the desired performance that we want for them and they want for themselves. And how do we give them that feedback, do a good job with that, and then move them forward into acting upon that good feedback. We also get involved in advising them. Again, our goal, you'll find out the goal with coaching is not to give your employees all the answers. It's to help them come to the answers themselves. That's how you train them to think on their own, and we'll talk more about that. The last thing is referring, and referring, as we'll see in a couple slides, kind of gets at, if someone is interested in going in a particular direction, that we provide the resources for them and the guidance in terms of how to make that path happen. So we might refer them to certain resources to help them to learn some different skills. What are some of the other ways that we can help develop our workers? Again, as I said, training. We get engaged in training, which is the day-to-day skills that they need. we can be engaged in the mentoring side of things, which is much more of a formal program. It's an emotional relationship between a mentor and their protege to help them navigate the workplace, over a few years' time. Mentors are not necessarily your direct boss. In fact, they probably shouldn't be. A mentor should be somebody outside of your line of command, and because in that circumstance, you're getting less biased advice in terms of how you might perform better under their direction, as opposed to how to navigate the politics and the issues and concerns that go on in the business. Lastly, we also help develop our workers through the issues of disciplining them, because performance management is being able to do the job, but it's also about following the company rules. And when people aren't following the company rules, we've got to deal with that issue of discipline fairly clearly. So we'll talk a little bit about that next week as well. Training and development, when we think about how training and development lay themselves out, training is the immediate, whereas development is not just the immediate, but it's also the long-term focus that we take in terms of the career path for individuals. So we'll spend some time talking about career paths, I think next week or the week after. But our goal really is thinking about, as the career path moves forward, how do we ensure that we're getting the skills that we need, as well as the employee is getting what they need. Right? It's a two-way street. Development doesn't work if I'm only getting what I need as the employer, but as the employee, you're not getting what you need. So we need to be thinking about that as a mutually beneficial relationship, or it's supposed to be a mutually beneficial relationship in terms of development. So where do we find coaches? I mean, we talk about coaching. I know that there's a growing field of executive coaches out there. Where do we find these folks? Well, let's start with understanding the role of coaching. Obviously, coaching is a way of helping employees on a daily basis to navigate challenges that they encounter. This is not like mentoring. You can see at the bottom of the slide, I do a comparison between coaching and mentoring. And coaching is it's an ongoing relationship. Sometimes it's spontaneous, but it pops up when there's issues of career goals or issues of navigating problems or challenges in the job. And not just on a how do I do X, right? How do I fill out this paperwork? That's not coaching, that's instructing, that's training, right? Coaching is, how do I deal with this troubling employee who always fights me? So you coach someone to help them to think about the best way to manage that troublesome employee or to manage that troublesome colleague who always fights them in meetings. And so you're helping them to see the situation from a different perspective. And so this is about helping them to develop skills that they need to advance in the workplace. Where do coaches come from? As I said in the initial question, in-house coaches are your managers or your supervisors, the people that you directly report to. So all of you, as you launch into your careers as managers, if you're not one already, that's going to be one of the key things that you have to do, is finding a way to coach people, to help them to think for themselves. You can't spend your whole life just telling them what to do, because then they learn to become dependent on you and not dependent on themselves to be able to make good decisions. Alternatively, organizations many times will support an executive coach or someone's personal coach, which is usually an outside consultant, somebody who has certifications in being a professional coach, and their goal in being a professional coach is to help you as an outsider see your realms and needs of development and help you to get to that place. A lot of times an executive coach just helps you to be a better executive. A personal coach is really sort of helping you to decide what is it that you truly want and need and desire in your career. And what you might find is the answers to those questions may come up as, my ultimate goals and desires are not to stay at this organization or to do what I want to do in this industry, but actually to move on to something else, bigger, better, what have you. Your in-house manager primarily their goal is helping you navigate the job you have and the job you may potentially have in the company. Whereas an outside coach is helping you, yes, with the current job you have, but may also help you think about other options that are outside the boundaries of the walls of the current company you're in. And coaches can be expensive. They can be, thousands of dollars a month, a couple $100 a session, could be $50 a session. It depends on the coach that you want to use and the reason why you want to use them. It depends on the coach's certifications, training, years of experience. There's a whole wide variety of considerations when it comes to the financials on those sorts of things. So you can have your in-house manager or you can have the outside consultant. Either way, they all serve different roles. If you really are unhappy in your current career, I would recommend getting an executive or personal coach, somebody that's outside of the company that helps you to sort of start to think about where you want to be, what do you want to do, and how do you want to spend the next couple of years of your career in what area and how. If the company believes in your development and wants you to develop, then they will pay for your coach. And my brother-in-law used to be a research scientist at Bell Labs. And when he had the opportunity to go into management track versus the scientist track, he shifted over to the management track, but he didn't have experience as an executive. He wasn't used to being a person managing processes, managing resources. He was a scientist that managed research plans. It's a very different skill set. So AT&T paid for him to have an executive coach to help him on a weekly basis to navigate some of the challenges that it took to shift gears from just thinking about managing, a science project, in the design of a scientific process, to what it meant to manage a budget, manage people, manage resources, manage deadlines, etc. Very different skill set. Alternatively, I certainly recommend, if you have your own interest and skills and needs, to pay for it on your own. Obviously, your manager or supervisor, they're getting paid to coach you. That's what part of their job description is. But if you want an outside coach, sometimes the company will pay for it, or I would recommend that you would pay for it on your own. And I've used a personal coach myself, trying to sort of help navigate a number of different challenges I was facing in my life. And it's not therapy. Therapists are not coaches, and coaches aren't therapists. They're two separate jobs, two separate things. A coach is about asking you the questions to coach you through challenges that you're going through, to help you to help ask you questions, and in asking those questions, get you to a place where you can come to those conclusions yourself, right? So I could teach somebody to fish. I can hand them fish. I can teach them to fish. Or I can give you the resources to fish on your own. And I would rather make sure that you have the skills you need to make those decisions on your own rather than me doing it for you. So getting to the bottom of this, right, where I said we were comparing and contrasting coaching and mentoring. Mentoring is much more about an emotional relationship between somebody who's more senior and somebody who's more junior. They're not in the hierarchical line of succession. They're usually outside of that. Somebody that has a good reputation, is good at role modeling things in terms of sharing contacts and giving support and advice and where to go to find things, and to just generally support how someone can get through the whole work process and helping them to make the adjustment to the new organization. So they're very different, and we'll talk at the end of this lecture on the issue of what mentoring is. So getting more deeply into what is coaching. Number one, coaching is helping employees solve their own problems versus you solving it for them. Because it's really easy to answer the question, just say, oh, this is how you do it, as opposed to coaching people to solve the problem on their own, teaching them how to think through the issue, asking them the appropriate questions so that they think about it in a different way, and then help them to develop the skills they need to actually solve their problems on their own. The other thing that's also important with coaching is that there needs to be a learning orientation focus. The goal here is that people need to be able to make mistakes. People need opportunities to learn. There cannot be a punitive atmosphere around this relationship, because if it's a punitive atmosphere, people are going to be afraid to take risks, and they don't want to then learn something new, something different. They don't want to think about it differently because they don't want to take that risk. So there has to be a learning orientation focus from the coach's perspective, but also from the coachee or the protege, however you want to call it, the person being coached. They need also to have this learning orientation so that they recognize that it's okay to learn and adapt and grow, and you're giving them permission to do that in a way that's safe. There needs to be a focus on emotional intelligence, not only understanding your emotions and understanding and able to assess a situation. Both of these things are important. So I've got to be aware of myself, and I've got to be aware of what my strengths and weaknesses are. I have to be able to assess a circumstance and determine what I think somebody else's issues and needs are, and I have to be able to manage my emotions well. Emotional intelligence serves us so well in so many different ways. And so the more that we can learn to develop this, the more that we're going to recognize that the emotion management is, and the emotional intelligence is going to be the thing that we need the most in terms of juggling the challenges of managing people on a daily basis. We need to be communicating effectively. We need to make sure we're providing information to people and communicating with transparency, but we also need to make sure we're listening, and listening clearly and listening well. So we're going to spend some time talking about listening skills and how do we ensure that people are actually actively hearing what we need. We did spend some time talking about communication a couple weeks ago, but we're going to get into this in a little bit more depth now as we start to get into applying it in a coaching context. We need to make sure we're accessible for our employees, that we have an open door policy, that we know that when they're feeling a challenge that they can come talk to me, and there will be no judgment, and there's no sense of why are you bothering me with these questions. You know, having that open environment enables people to say, hey, look, I've got a challenge, can I talk to you? And that creates the appropriate coaching context. And then lastly, it has to be a trusting relationship, and that's one of the reasons why I'm bundling the trust relationship as well as the coaching, the introduction to coaching together, because we have to build trust, which means we have to build trust through self-disclosure, through being good followers, being good leaders, as well as understanding what's going to help trust, what's going to hurt trust. So going back to those 4 roles I told you about in the very first slide, the coach, the appraiser, the advisor, and the referral agent. The coach, as you can see there, helps to define problems and concerns, helps to clarify issues, and helps the employee learn how to solve the problems for themselves. So they want to make sure they're clear about what your interests and your needs and your values are. They're good listeners, and they make sure they're really getting to the bottom line problem, what the real concerns are. The appraiser is about giving feedback and setting standards and making sure those standards are being communicated. So that's the performance appraisal and discipline process. You know, understanding what the expectations are in terms of performance and in terms of employee behaviors around company policies. And so the appraisal process we'll spend some time talking about in the next week, getting at issues of discipline, issues of performance appraisal, and what do we need to think about in terms of doing that. The next is the advisor process, where you want to be thinking about how do I help you set goals. What kind of advice can I give you in terms of career paths? What options might be available to you? The goal here is, again, as an advisor, is to be a resource, to say, here's what I can do to help. Here's some things I can think about. What do you think should be the right goal? I recommend you try this, but clearly this is, these are questions you have to answer for yourself in terms of what it is that you want, from your career long haul. So these are the kinds of things one might say as an advisor. And then lastly, as a referral agent, I want to be able to make sure I've got my employees making the connections to the Human Resource Management Department, to the Training and Development Department, so that they're getting the career resources they need. When I identify that they need something and I can see it, I make sure that their names are being tossed in the barrel for access to resources, access to training opportunities, access to different experiential opportunities so they can develop the broader skills that they need. So I'm going to be referring them often to an internal and external resources to be able to do that development as they need to. So when I think about what I want to do to develop my employees to make sure that they are getting what they need on a daily basis, I'm a coach, I'm an appraiser, I'm an advisor, and I'm a referral agent so that my employees can be more fully developed in a way that benefits them and benefits the organization. So effective coaching techniques. What do we need to be an effective coach? Well, first of all, we've got to make sure we've got a good coaching context where we have very clear guidelines, we have a very clear culture that is going to encourage people to come and talk to me, and so that we have open and transparent communication between us. The coaching context, as we'll get into in a few moments, is about really making sure we're clear about the parameters for what we're doing, and that all sides understand what a person can and can't do. We need to be actively listening to the individual, not trying to tell them what we want to tell them, but actually to listen to what they want to do. Listen to what their problems are, listen to their challenges, not only listening to the words, but listening to the subtext. There may be other issues involved that, are beyond just the words that they're using. It might be that there's a larger issue going on and you have to ask those questions. This is where the emotional intelligence comes into play, or learning how to be a more high context communicator, where it's not just the words, but it's the larger emotions going on in the moment to address those things. We need to ask good questions. Again, it's not about giving advice, but asking the tough questions to get the employee to think for themselves about how to solve the problem. And we want to make sure we're giving them useful feedback, not just, well, you were a 5 out of 5 on the performance appraisal, or you were a 3 out of 5 on the performance appraisal, but actually giving them constructive feedback, not only on what the problem was, but on how to improve it. So as I'm sure you saw from the reading, a coaching-friendly context needs a number of different things. First of all, it needs these values of trust and openness, a learning orientation or a tolerance for mistakes and learning from mistakes. We want to make sure that we do a good job hiring the right people in the first place. Go back to the motivation lecture in the applied expectancy model, the expanded expectancy model, where we talked about someone has to have the ability, they have to have the motivation, they have to have the resources to be able to perform, and then we have to have good compensation and good company policies to ensure that they're actually satisfied in the long run. So going back to that expanded expectancy model, one of the ways that we can make sure that we've got people who are able to do the job, whether it's based on their competencies, general competencies around work attitudes and work ethic, person-organization match, as we've talked about, or whether it's person-job match, they have the basic skills. We start with making sure we're doing a good job hiring. The better the job we do at the hiring stage, the easier it is then for us to work and develop with them, because we know we have people that are ambitious, they have the right motivation to do the job, and we can move forward from there. We want people who are thinking about learning not just for the short term, but for the long term, because that's really where development comes into play. Learning for the short term is training, but learning for the long term is development, and a willingness to build a long-term relationship with the company. We want to make sure when we have reward systems that we're not punishing people for working on developmental issues. We want to make sure we have a system in place that says, we want you to develop, and we want to create the time and efforts and concerns to make sure people are getting developed. I worked for a company, the same one that I've had some other challenges with in terms of, I think I told you about the performance appraisal that I got about the fact that I didn't wear makeup. And the reward system, was punitive to me because I was managing by walking around, and I would go and I would talk to people and I would build relationships with them and I would learn a little bit more about what they needed. And then when I learned more about what they needed, I was able to better do it. But I got punished because I was walking around. They didn't really like that. So you can't, tell people to, here's the tools you need to be successful, and now I'm going to punish you for using the tools. That's not going to work. Most important in terms of that coaching-friendly context is people have to feel valued by you as an employer, and as their boss, and by the organization itself. If people don't feel valued in any way, and that gets at some of the intrinsic motivators we talked about, just the thank yous and the appreciate what you're doing, and speaking to people kindly and being transparent, in information that we give them. People have to feel valued. It's the only way you're going to be a successful coach. If you have a context where people don't feel valued, that people feel like they can't make mistakes, that there's no trust, no transparency, coaching's not going to work. You can coach all day long, try to coach all day long, but it's not going to really work as effectively as if you actually had a circumstance where you had an employee who might be working in that kind of context, and an employee working with trust and tolerance for mistakes and long-term orientation and learning and things like that. They're much more coachable. So your culture, your company culture, has to support the coaching context. It has to support the process of coaching. Without it, it's not going to be successful at all. I really liked the coaching-friendly checklist that the book has. Number 1, asking the question, have you explained your management philosophy, including your approach towards your mistakes? Have you explained this to the group that you supervise? Have you explained this to any new people if they've come in? It's really good when we come up with a philosophy and we explain it to people and we think, yahoo, we're done. And then we forget when the new employee walks in the door and they start working on the team, that they need to be brought up to speed on what your philosophy are, what your tactics are, what is it that you want to do, and what is it that you're trying to accomplish. Every new person that enters the team has to be oriented to what your management philosophy is. Next, are you able to walk the talk and be true to your management philosophy? It's one thing to say you do things, but it's another thing to actually do it. You can say, oh, I'm very democratic and I like to coach and I like to give feedback, and then you end up micromanaging your employees. It just makes them crazy. So it's really a good idea to think about, what does it mean to operationalize your management philosophy? What does it look like? If I wanted somebody to say to me, you're a really good manager because you do X, what does that look like? Once you're able to identify that, then you can work on developing your plan to actually practice it. So the next things on the coaching-friendly checklist are, number 3, are you accessible? Have you communicated to your employees that you want to know when they have questions, when they need help, when things aren't going well, or have you basically said, I want to know these things, but then you don't make yourself available to talk to them? It's one thing to say, yes, I have an open door and I'm accessible, come on in. And another thing when you put up barriers so that they feel like it's not worth coming in to meet with you and to talk with you about this. It's essential that when you say, I'm accessible and I'm open to you, that you absolutely make yourself accessible. You have to follow through on that. Otherwise, there's a breach of trust there, that you really don't mean what you say, and that's going to be a problem. The next item, number 4, do you convey in words and actions an interest in your employees when they ask to speak with you? Again, this is part of the accessible thing. When they say, I need to speak with you, don't let your body language and your tone and your words be out of alignment. You make sure that they're in alignment, as we talked about in the communications lecture, that the words and actions have to say, yes, absolutely. Can we set up a time in 15 minutes, in an hour? Can we meet for lunch today? Let's talk. Let's do it. And make sure that the tone and the body language and the words are all in alignment in supporting that. Number 5, are you clear in your mind about the distinction between coaching and evaluation? Now, we're going to talk about those differences, particularly next week. But you want to make sure that your coaching efforts aren't stepping on the feet of the performance appraisal system and vice versa. We want to make sure these things are working together in support rather than in conflict. So we don't want to say, yes, I want you to be able to do these things, and then we don't support people to give them the actual resources they need to be able to make the changes that they need. So the last two items in our coaching friendly checklist are number 6, do you demonstrate through your actions that you want others to coach you? This is key because this is about the followership thing and empowering your followers to provide you with feedback. But what that requires of you is to set your ego aside to hear the feedback, to hear that perhaps you're not doing the best job that you could be, that they need something else, and you have to be willing to make those changes. A good manager is adaptable. A good manager and a good leader knows how to adapt what they can offer their employees based on what they need, not based on what I'm going to give them. Number 7, do you help the members of your group deal with threats of punishment from outside the group? So are you helping them navigate the challenges of working in a larger, more social environment, where you enable them and teach them how to deal with the politics, how to deal with the negotiations, how to stand firm, how to represent themselves more appropriately. So when there's threats from outside, when there are tensions there, they need to also know how to stand up for themselves and to manage those relationships equally well. And your job is to coach them to do that as well. Good coaching managers have these characteristics in common. Number 1, they believe in being helpful. It's to a point of almost being an overriding desire to do this, but to be helpful, to make sure that your employees get the help they need. That's a big part of being a good, successful coach. You don't want people to just sink or swim. I mean, we all know, right? That's the worst way to teach a kid how to swim, is just dumping them into the deep end and expecting them to just work their way out. It creates fear, it creates mistrust. Dumping your employees into the deep end is no better. Sink or swim, it's not going to fly. I mean, it may come a point where you've coached them to a point where they're going to succeed or fail on their own. Yes, but when they're asking for help, particularly if this is a new area, you don't want to just throw them in the deep end and say, go, good luck. That's not my job. I taught you, and now you go do. Your goal is, if they're successful, you're successful, so why would you do anything to impede their ability to be successful? Good coaching managers also believe that helping employees develop means everybody comes out ahead, and that's basically what I just said. If you're developing them, you look good because they're doing their job better, and then you get to do your job better. You spend less time then managing errors and problems and concerns, and much more time on the positive side of things, helping and guiding and focusing people in the direction that you want to go into. Coaching managers are not control freaks. That's the interesting thing. One would think that it would be about, needing to have control over things, and it's not. It's actually training people, trusting them, empowering them, and letting them go to town. And trusting that you've done a good job. If you don't trust yourself that you've done a good job, that's your problem. So you need to be less focused on controlling things like a micromanager and much more focused on giving them all the skills that they need so they can do it on their own. The next thing is good coaching managers believe that people really do want to learn. They have this very, what we call, theory Y approach to motivation and performance. Theory X, this is McGregor's work, Theory X believes that most workers are lazy, they don't want to work hard, and that they have to be punished in order to be able to get them to do their job. Theory Y says the opposite, that workers really want to learn, they want to do well, they want to achieve. And so the Theory Y approach is what works here. Coaching managers take a much more Theory Y approach, the idea that people want to learn, they want to grow, they want to be better, and so your job then is to help them to grow and learn and be better. Coaching managers are also good at showing empathy, which means that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say, I understand, and you know what, it sucks. I understand, and it hurts. I understand, and I appreciate how frustrating this is. Let's see if we can come up with a plan to make it better. So that's what a good coach does. A coaching manager is open to their own feedback, to learning how to improve their role as a leader and a coach in the company, how to be a better manager on a daily basis. A coaching manager is really good at setting standards that are appropriate, that are high, that are reachable, but push people a little bit to make them that much better. Coaching managers don't try to fix people, but try to help them to make the improvements needed to be successful. And then, obviously giving them appropriate feedback that says if this is not working and we've made all the interventions we can, then it's time to let go. But a good coaching manager isn't about, I'm going to fix you because I don't like that you do X, but it's like looking at the bigger picture and realizing that, they're successful in their own way to get things done, and maybe managing the outcome and not the process is the way to go. The last thing about good coaching managers is that they don't believe that people are a means to an end. So they don't use them, they don't abuse them, they don't just say the only thing that matters is getting this stuff done, and I'll just step all over you in order to make it happen. So that's a focus, and we'll spend some time talking about a case like that where there's a manager that really treats his employees to a mean to an end, and we'll talk about some idealistic and realistic approaches for managing that. On the other side of a good coach is a good coachable employee. And what is a good coachable employee? And again, this is part of that followership, right? A good follower. What does that look like? A good coachable employee has to reflect on their own actions. They have to be willing to be as objective as possible. Not an easy thing to do, but the more that we can bring some degree of objectivity to the way that we look at ourselves and not judge ourselves, right? It's looking at ourselves without judgment, but recognizing that we have our own strengths and weaknesses. A coachable employee is also very curious about what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, and how others are doing it so that they can be better. A coachable employee also accepts that someone might actually know more than them, and maybe not in all circumstances, but in some circumstances you recognize that this person has an expertise, it's worth listening to, and I can improve, to some extent by taking some of what their knowledge is and integrating it into my own work. A coachable employee isn't bound by shame, so that when they find that they have a weakness, they're afraid to tell their coach or their boss. They have to be willing to be vulnerable to say, I really screwed up here and this is a problem. So that's a coachable person. You want to be able to listen, particularly to balanced feedback. This is what you're good at. This is where you have some challenges and let's work on this. Without it going, well, it's all your fault. You didn't do this. That's that self-serving bias. Self-serving bias can play a huge role in coaching employees where we want to deflect the blame or to the boss. So our goal is, of course, is to listen and to accept that there are things that we're good at and things we're maybe not so good at. A coachable employee also really wants to be coached and they want to improve and to learn, and so they might come to you even if you're not necessarily gifted at coaching yet. That coachable employee is telling you, I want to be coached. I want more feedback. I want to learn how to be better. And that's the first indication, the flag for you to say, go for it and practice those skills with that individual. Start working on developing your coaching, expertise. So the coaching value proposition, again, another thing that I really liked from the book was questions to ask yourself. Number one, to what business or organization goal does your team or organization aspire? So what are the goals that you're aspiring towards? So whether or not coaching is going to have any value, you've got to first know what the goal is. Then you need to know what the skills and capabilities are of the people that you have. Are they going to be able to achieve those goals? If they don't have those skills and capabilities, how do we get those skills and capabilities to those individuals? And that's where coaching can come into play. What's the best way then for you to attain the talent that you need? Do you want to hire the people with the skills? And that's absolutely appropriate. It's one staffing strategy that we can take. We could teach people in the classroom those basic skills. If we're hiring more for person organization fit and then we train them later, we can do that. We can build the skills through coaching where we hire people who are good, but we try to coach them continually in the direction that we want them to do. Lastly, sometimes the only way we can get through something is to just do nothing. Because if people really don't want to do it, they have no interest in doing it, you could work all day long putting them in the classroom, trying to coach them, they're just not interested. So the do nothing isn't meant to be, as the guy in the textbook says, a tongue-in-cheek approach to this. It's not sarcasm, it's simply sometimes there's nothing you can do. Either there's nothing you can do because they're just not interested, or you really don't need to worry about doing anything because these people are going to fly on their own. So the do nothing can have a positive and a negative connotation to it. The last thing on the coaching value proposition is, what supports do your employees need to sustain their effort over a long period of time? And we talked about motivation theories and reinforcement theories and what it's going to take to get them to continue this over the long haul. And these are one of the biggest gaps that we have in training, is how not just training people in the skills, but actually how to retain those skills and practice them and use them over the long haul. If people don't do that, then the biggest challenge that we have is that, the skill, all the money that we invested in the training and development is not going to stick. It's going to be wasted. And we've just spent money and time wasting, on doing this, and it's not going to go anywhere. So to follow up on the last little bits of this introductory lecture on coaching, I want to talk a little bit about mentoring programs and the importance of good mentoring programs. So what are some of the characteristics of successful programs? First of all, it has to be voluntary. And people should not feel coerced or forced into doing a mentoring program if they don't want to. Once you force people to do it, it loses its ability to be effective. We want to make sure that we don't limit the relationship that's built in. We can't say, well, you can do this, but you can't go out to dinner, you can't spend social time together, you can't do this or that, you're not allowed to interact, you can only do a lunch once a month. We're not supposed to limit that relationship or allow it to really develop the way it needs to. You want to make sure that you are choosing effective mentors, people who have a good past record of a desire and interest in developing people, that they're good at doing it, that they're willing to serve as a mentor, and that they have the skills to coach, good communication skills, good listening skills, things like that. These are, some of the things that are really important for a good mentoring program. Lastly, what else do we need for a successful mentoring program? We want to make sure that the purpose of the program is clear. Why are we doing this? It's not enough to just say, well, we need mentors, we think it'll help. What do you expect it to help? Make sure that's clear, that it's laid out in a plan, what the expectations are, how we're going to measure whether or not this is actually going to be working. We need to be checking in with people both qualitatively and quantitatively. We want to know how long they're going to be in this mentoring program. Is it going to be indefinite? Is it for 2 years, 1 year, 6 months? What is it going to be? Ideally, you want it to be a few years so they build a relationship over the long haul, but every company is different. We want to know what the minimum expectations are in terms of communications. We don't want to limit it, but we want to at least set the basement. We want to know what the minimum is needed in order to do that. We want to make sure that we are encouraging people to contact one another, right, to talk about problems, so that proteges can actually talk to each other, not just to their mentors. We want to make sure that we're evaluating, as I said, both quantitatively and qualitatively what that mentor program is doing, whether or not it's successful. And we want to make sure that when people are getting developed, that the process of developing people is actually going to be rewarded appropriately. So all of those things are really key to ensuring that we have a mentor program that's going to work and that helps people to sort of navigate the larger, more, how do we work in this company sort of issues of mentoring and the way, as I said, building that long-term emotional connection with someone that's not your direct boss. That's a helpful thing. Not every company needs a mentoring program, but if they do, these are the guidelines that you need to make it work. So that's the introduction to what coaching is and to what mentoring is, the issue of training and development. We're going to talk next week more specifically about performance appraisals, and then also about how do we discipline people, how do we fire them, how do we let people go, and then of course practicing the feedback that we need in order to make these things work. So I'll talk to you in class.